In the course of exercising unchallenged macho-ness to keep us safe, the Bush administration has failed to stop at least one rogue nation from acquiring nuclear weapons. It has failed to stop whatever Iran is actually doing, and now we learn in our third story tonight, it failed to get Iran, through carrot or stick, to comply with the UN inspections trying to determine the extent of Iran's nuclear ambitions. The UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, yesterday reported that Iran may be withholding information that could help determine whether it ever tried to make nuclear arms and possibly whether it is now. The State Department spokesman today called the report, quote, very troubling. The National Security Council said Iran owes the world an explanation. Sound familiar? For its part, Iran points out that the report says all of its declared nuclear material is accounted for and claims that international treaties permit the enrichment of uranium for peaceful use. Either side apparently raising the possibility that Iran benefits from this suspicion by looking stronger to its neighbors, a scenario that by itself might sound familiar. Let's bring in an eyewitness to past U.S. failures, a past counterterrorism advisor to presidents of both parties, now the author of Your Government Failed You, Breaking the Cycle of National Security Disasters, chairman of GoodHarborReport.com, Richard Clarke. Good to talk to you again, sir.
Good evening, Keith. Good to be here.
Either Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons and the world has failed to stop Iran, or they're not and the world is treating them as if they are. Either way, does this count as one of those national security disasters you talk about in the book?
Well, it counts right now as an intelligence disaster. The U.S. spends $50 billion, actually over $50 billion a year. We've doubled the number of CIA analysts and operatives since 9/11, and yet we're continuing this 60-year-long tradition of never having sources inside the most important country at the time. Not having good sources inside the Soviet Union, North Korea, Al-Qaeda, Iraq, and now not having good sources inside Iran. So the truth is, we don't really know. If we did have good information, you could bet that CIA would have leaked it by now.
What are we then supposed to believe about Iran, let alone what are we supposed to do about Iran?
Well, Iran is not, the Iranian government is not a friendly government to the United States. It is a threat to stability in the region. It is a terrorist state sponsor. That's all true. And it is not a democracy despite the fact it has elections. They're all rigged. That's all true. But what we do about it is not necessarily to go to war. You know, the problem we had in Iraq was we never applied the Weinberger Doctrine, the Powell Doctrine, that asked 10 questions before you used force. If you ask those questions now about Iran, such as what would be the end game, who would be better off when the shooting was over, what could they do in retaliation to you, what would be the effect on the economy, the global economy, all of those questions come back very, very negative. And so to even think about using a military option without knowing that there was a serious threat to the United States and or its allies, such as Israel, is really repeating the mistakes of Iraq. And I mean, who could believe after Iraq happened only 5 years ago, and the mistakes were so obvious now, not obvious to a lot of people then, but obvious now, who could believe that we're going to do it again? Well, there are people in this town who do want to do it again.
Indeed. And in terms of how obvious it is, I imagine you've not read Scott McClellan's new book, but we talked about it earlier in the show, and there was one quote that begged out to be read to you for your reaction. He and his advisors, Mr. Bush that is, confused the propaganda campaign with the high level of candor and honesty so fundamentally needed to build and then sustain public support during a time of war. In this regard, he was terribly ill-served by his top advisors, especially those involved directly in national security. Does that sound familiar to you at all?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The National Security Council process that's supposed to be an honest broker, a nonpartisan activity, make sure the president has a real quality control operation going on, collapsed altogether, not just on Iraq, but across the board in the first several years of this administration. It's gotten a little better since, but it's still really not working. That's what I'm trying to talk about in Your Government Failed You. You know, it's not about 9/11, it's about the failures since and this continuing pattern of failure. Why do we have it? One of the reasons is the ideology and the politicization of things that used to be good government done by civil servants and experts.
Last one, and I'm asking you if this qualifies as a national security disaster. President Bush signing off on that deal with Pakistan. I will not go to his lengths and call him our Neville Chamberlain, but the treaty literally gave Al-Qaeda room to maneuver in Waziristan. Does that rank in this list of disasters that have happened since 9/11?
Well, you can bet that if a Democratic president had done that, they'd be crying for impeachment. What they acquiesced in was essentially the establishment of an al-Qaeda base, or the continuance of an al-Qaeda base in Pakistan, training terrorists to go around the world.
Extraordinary still. Former presidential counterterrorism advisor Richard Clarke, his new book is called Your Government Failed You. As always, as I said, sir, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Take care.
Thank you, Keith.
Take care.